The ancient house of Mr. Charles, made of brick and tile on a raised foundation, stood as a symbol of wealth that everyone in the village of Van Dyke dreamed of. The house had 3 rooms. The central room, the largest, was the guest room. The left room was where Mr. Charles lived alone, having passed away 7 years ago. The right room was for his son, David, and it was separated by a wide courtyard. Mr. Charles had also added a wing to the house with several rooms, including a bathroom and a grain storage room. The front and back courtyards were vast, and the house was full of memories. One day, Mr. Charles's son, David, noticed that his father seemed to have caught a fever again. As he entered the room, he found a strange atmosphere. The incense had not been lit yet, and the room was cold. His cat, which had been sitting on the porch, suddenly darted inside. David's wife, Maria, rushed to help, but she slipped on the steps, out of breath. After more than 10 years of working together, Maria had grown accustomed to these routines. Maria hurried to the stove to boil water for tea, and when she returned, she sat beside David. She noticed her father-in-law's hand was cold, and she was deeply shaken. "He's still here. He's not gone yet," she whispered, shaking. "But that's impossible," David exclaimed. "Father has been gone for nearly 2 months. The whole village knows. His funeral was held, and his tomb is at the riverbank. What do you mean he's still here?" Maria's face grew tense, and she slowly looked toward the family shrine. "Since his passing, I've been lighting incense every morning for him," she said. "But today, when I opened the incense burner, I saw him sitting at the head of the shrine, facing away from me. I was so close, I couldn't believe my eyes." David stood frozen. He couldn't understand. Could you be imagining things?" he asked. Maria insisted she wasn't. "It was him, David. It's as if he never left." The conversation continued, with Maria recalling an old black cat that Mr. Charles had always kept. The cat had disappeared when he died, only to reappear after 49 days, just like the old man's spirit. David tried to explain away the strange occurrences, attributing them to superstition. However, the fear in his wife's eyes made him hesitate. "I think we need to call the monks and have a ceremony," Maria insisted. "I can't live in this house any longer. Not after what happened." David, reluctant but convinced by Maria's fear, agreed. The next day, they invited 2 monks to perform a ceremony for his father's soul. But after the ceremony, David noticed something strange. The house felt different. He could still hear the sounds of footsteps in the house, the distinct click of Mr. Charles's shoes, even though no one was there. Maria, too, was troubled by the recurring sensation that something was wrong. Despite all the rituals, she felt the house was haunted by her father-in-law's restless spirit. One night, David saw a shadow standing by the shrine, and before he could react, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. When he turned around, no one was there. The event seemed to intensify. The black cat, which had never returned, now appeared on the porch again. The eerie noises continued, and David's unease grew. He could no longer deny the strange happenings. Eventually, unable to bear the stress, David took a drastic step. He hung himself in the house. Maria and David's son were left to carry on, but the house, which had once been full of life, now felt eerily empty. As for the cat, it disappeared again, leaving behind only memories of a family haunted by the past. From that day on, the house remained abandoned, with the spirits of the dead never truly leaving. Mrs. Lai tried to console him, saying it was enough that he wasn't in prison. Lai Hung still hoped there would be a chance to bring him back to the position of village chief, since he was only in his early 40s. When he heard his wife say that perhaps his father wanted him to remember him every day, Lai Hung felt a little sad. He put down his teacup and stood up forcefully, saying, "Since you've said so, let me light the incense for him." His wife, Maria, reminded him, "No, you need to change your clothes first. You can't do this in your pajamas. It's disrespectful to light incense for your father like this." Lai Hung sat down again, uncertain, and asked his wife, "Didn't you see him sitting by the altar? I still think you might have been seeing things in the dim light. It's possible that the incense in the dark room played tricks on your mind." Mrs. Lai shook her head firmly and said, "No, I saw him clearly. He was sitting at the head of the bed, where he used to sit and smoke his loud tobacco. Lai Hung, still trying to dismiss the idea, said, "It's all nonsense. Why would he appear in the middle of the day?" But Mrs. Lai persisted. "It's not just that. The black cat he raised was gone when he passed, and now, after 49 days, it's back. I saw it outside the window the other day. I was startled." At this point, Lai Hung still didn't believe it. "Could it be that you are imagining it?" he asked. But Maria was firm in her conviction. "No, it's real. It's as if he's still here. I even heard his footsteps." As the conversation continued, Lai Hung's doubts remained. He eventually agreed to perform a ceremony to honor his late father, despite his disbelief. The next day, they invited the monks to come to perform the rites. After the ceremony, Lai Hung felt the tension in the house. The eerie noises and the strange presence only seemed to grow stronger. His wife was still convinced that the house was haunted by her father-in-law's spirit. That evening, as they were preparing dinner, Lai Hung heard footsteps approaching. He turned and saw his father's old black cat, sitting in front of the shrine. His heart raced, and before he could react, he heard the sound of footsteps again, closer now, as if someone was walking toward him. A cold chill filled the air, and Lai Hung froze, unable to move. Suddenly, the cat darted out of the room, and Lai Hung ran after it, chasing it through the house. He stumbled, feeling like he was losing control. His wife, hearing the commotion, rushed to him and asked, "What's going on? Have you seen something?" Lai Hung couldn't speak. The fear had taken hold of him. "Let's go to the temple and pray again," Mrs. Lai said, urging him. "We need to get rid of whatever spirit is here." Lai Hung, still shaking, nodded in agreement. "We'll go after dinner," he said quietly. The next day, they went to the temple, but Lai Hung couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As they approached the temple, he saw an elderly man standing by the gate. His wife recognized him as an old friend of the family, someone they hadn't seen in years. The man seemed to be watching them, but before Lai Hung could say anything, the man disappeared into the shadows. Later that evening, after they had returned from the temple, Lai Hung couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, restless, as the sound of footsteps echoed through the house. He tried to ignore it, but the footsteps grew louder, closer. He finally couldn't take it anymore and ran out of the house, down to the courtyard, and straight to the kitchen. His wife followed, worried. "Did you see something?" Maria asked, noticing his pale face. Lai Hung didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the ground, his mind racing with thoughts of the strange events. Maria sat beside him, trying to calm him. "We'll get through this, but we need to do another ceremony. We need to bring peace to this house." Lai Hung finally nodded, his resolve weakened by the fear he couldn't deny. The next day, they invited 2 monks to come and perform the rites once again. This time, Lai Hung felt a weight lift from his shoulders, though the fear still lingered. He knew they could never truly escape the past, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could find peace in the rituals that connected the living and the dead. Mrs. Lai helped Tone prepare the meal quickly. Her mind was still occupied with unresolved matters. She knew that if her father-in-law's spirit returned one more time, she would no longer be able to live in this old house full of memories. It had now become a haunted house. No one could live with spirits. Tone spoke up. "Mrs. Lai, if both you and Mr. Lai go to the temple, let me come with you. Or let me go to the market. I can't stay home alone." Mrs. Lai, feeling sympathy for Tone, nodded and said, "All right, just finish cooking first. Then we'll go after dinner." 20 minutes later, Mrs. Lai came out of her room, dressed in a morning gown, her head still wrapped in a cloth. As she opened the door, she heard some faint sounds from behind, and when she looked, she saw a shadow near the family shrine. She felt uneasy and walked to her husband to speak about it. "I'm worried. Why are you still sleeping? We need to leave now." But before she could say more, she heard Lai Hung's voice from outside. "Mrs. Lai, why are you standing here? Who's still here? What's happening?" She turned and froze, seeing a figure that looked like her father-in-law. "Oh no, he's back," she gasped, her heart racing with fear. Lai Hung was speechless, unsure of what to say. Mrs. Lai, too, had reached the conclusion that they couldn't stay here anymore. "This house isn't livable anymore," she said, her voice filled with dread. Lai Hung, though frightened, said, "Let's go to the temple and bring the monks back to pray again." Mrs. Lai had been thinking about this for a while. She urgently told her husband, "We need to bring the monks here to perform another ceremony. I can't bear seeing his spirit again." Lai Hung, understanding his wife's fears, agreed but was still troubled. "I'll go change and then light incense for him," he said. But before he could leave, Mrs. Lai reminded him to dress properly. "You can't do it in your pajamas. It's disrespectful." Lai Hung, after some hesitation, agreed and went to change. When he stepped outside, he saw familiar faces approaching. It was a couple of old friends from the village, including the local geomancer and his student. They greeted him warmly and mentioned they were in the area looking for good land. "Would you like to sit down and rest?" Lai Hung offered. The geomancer and his student agreed and sat with him. After some conversation, Lai Hung learned that they had been traveling for some time, studying the land in search of the best places to bury ancestors. The geomancer explained, "It's a tricky science, Mr. Lai. The theory is simple, but finding the right land is very difficult. You must know how to read the landscape, the rise and fall of the land, the direction of the water." Lai Hung, intrigued, listened carefully as the geomancer led them to a spot by the river. "This land is ideal," the geomancer said, looking around. "It's high and dry, no risk of flooding, and it has good energy." Tone, who had been following them, asked, "So this is the perfect land to bury Mr. Lee's father?" The geomancer nodded. "Yes, if you bury him here, his descendants will prosper." Lai Hung, having grown fond of the idea, decided to purchase the land. The deal was quickly made, and the geomancer assured him it was a good investment for the family's future. Time passed, and the family's life returned to a quiet normal. However, despite all the changes and rituals, Lai Hung couldn't escape the feelings of unease. His father-in-law's passing had left a void in the house, and Lai Hung's efforts to move forward were constantly interrupted by his fears of the spirit's presence. One day, 2 years after the purchase of the burial land, Lai Hung felt a heavy burden on his chest. His father-in-law's spirit was still unsettled. As he lay in bed, reflecting on his decisions, Lai Hung realized he hadn't truly let go of the past. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and Lai Hung heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. He leapt from his bed and ran outside, only to find the familiar black cat waiting by the door. "Not again," he muttered, but it was too late. He turned to his wife. "I've had enough of this. I need to make peace." Mrs. Lai, seeing her husband's distress, nodded in agreement. "We need to finally move on. Let's go to the temple one last time." Lai Hung agreed, and together, they left the house for the temple to seek peace for their family once and for all. So, Mr. Ba's spirit rested by the river. The story of his death was known only to Lai Hung, and the land that he had chosen to bury his father-in-law would now lead Lai Hung and his descendants to a path of honor. Every decision Lai Hung made was thoughtful, but there was one thing that lingered in his mind. The words of Tone still echoed. "Those who die wrongfully, whose spirits cannot ascend, often return." It was true, and it weighed heavily on Lai Hung's thoughts. One day, near the riverbank, a woman approached Lai Hung. She nodded at him and said, "I don't know if you remember me, Mr. Lai, but I am Ben. I married someone from across the river almost 20 years ago. Ben was your first child, wasn't she? Do you remember me?" Lai Hung replied, "Yes, I do." The woman looked at Boss grave and sighed. "It's so unfair. Your father-in-law was such a good man, but his life was taken so soon. The whole village mourned his passing." Lai Hung nodded in agreement, but he did not speak. He quickly made his way back to the village, still haunted by the recent events. When he arrived home, it was already dark. Mrs. Lai greeted him with a calm voice, saying, "Nothing strange happened tonight, but I haven't even gone into the living room. I haven't been near the backyard either. How can I stay here anymore?" Lai Hung understood his wife's fears and tried to comfort her, but deep down, he knew that living here had become unbearable. Mrs. Lai, though, wanted to keep the peace. So she said, "Let's go to the temple again. We need to bring the monks back and pray once more." Lai Hung reluctantly agreed. "All right, let's go after dinner. I'll change my clothes and we'll head out." Later, after dinner, Mrs. Lai hurriedly told him, "Please change your clothes first. You can't go to the temple looking like that. It's disrespectful." Lai Hung sighed, feeling the weight of it all, but agreed to change. 20 minutes later, they were preparing to leave. But just then, they heard a familiar voice outside. It was one of their neighbors, an older woman who came to speak with them. "Excuse me, Mr. Lai, but I heard something strange. When I was outside, I saw someone sitting by the tree. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized it looked like your father-in-law." Lai Hung froze, his heart racing. "What? Are you sure?" The woman nodded. "Yes." And then the figure disappeared just as quickly. I was so scared. I went back into the house and told my husband, but we couldn't find him again. This news troubled Lai Hung even more. What is happening? Why does his spirit keep returning? He thought, his mind racing. At that moment, Tone spoke up, saying, "Maybe we should go to the temple, ask the monks for guidance, and offer another ceremony for him. We have to help him rest in peace." Lai Hung agreed and went to the temple with his wife. There, they performed the rites again. The monks prayed for his father-in-law's spirit, hoping to put an end to the haunting. But despite the prayers and the offerings, the presence of the spirit still lingered. That night, Lai Hung lay in bed, unable to sleep. The sounds of footsteps echoed through the house, and he could feel the cold air. It was as if his father-in-law's spirit was still with them, refusing to leave. The following morning, after the ceremony, Lai Hung and his family discussed their options. Tone suggested, "Why don't you visit a monk who's known for helping spirits pass on? I've heard of him from the villagers. He could help." Mrs. Lai, desperate to end the haunting, agreed, saying, "If it will help, I'll go with you." They visited the monk, who told them, "It's not just about the spirit. It's about peace and letting go of the past. Only then can you find true peace in your home." Lai Hung, now more resolute, said to his wife, "We will make sure his spirit is at peace. We'll do whatever it takes." As the years passed, the day we are born is already determined by fate. Geography no longer has any influence. We have to wait until the next generations, those yet to be born, for geography to have an impact. If the land is good, it will benefit the grandchildren, not the person already born like Mr. Lai. Since Mr. Lai was already born, feng shui no longer applies to him. The geomancer didn't pay attention to Lai Hung's reappearance, still smiling and asking how many generations back. In Hung Yen, someone showed me the lineage records of the Viet family, who were buried in auspicious land. The geomancer noted that by the 5th generation, the family would achieve literary success. And indeed, by the 5th generation, 2 brothers in the family became governors. Lai Hung was speechless. After learning of Ba's death, Lai realized it didn't bring him any benefit. A student of the geomancer continued, telling Mr. Lai, "The first lesson all geomancers teaches. First is fate, second is virtue, third is feng shui. Only by living virtuously can one expect good fortune. Evil deeds will nullify even the best feng shui." Lai Hung escorted the guests to the gate and slumped into a chair in the kitchen, dazed and spiritless. Once someone is born, feng shui no longer changes their destiny. Knowing that, why did he kill his father? It was a wrongful death that brought no advantage to Lai Hung. That whole day, he was distant and inattentive. He said, "Well, I've already arranged with the monks to return Sunday. We'll just have to wait." The shaman cut in. "Since last night, the old man hasn't appeared again. That's a good sign. You should try to sleep. Tonight, the 3 of us will sleep upstairs again." At 3 a.m., Lai Hung sensed something, and immediately afterward, the sound of wooden clogs echoed in the quiet house. It was the familiar sound of the old man, walking the corridor after meals. Horrified, Lai Hung grabbed his wife's arm, waking her up suddenly. "What's wrong?" she asked groggily. "Did you hear footsteps?" he whispered. "Wind can't make that sound. Don't tell me you don't hear it too." I don't hear anything. If you can't sleep, at least be quiet so we can, she grumbled. Terrified, Lai Hung turned his back to his wife and covered his ears. But the sound of the clogs continued, echoing like arrows into his heart. It lasted until dawn, when the sound finally stopped. The next day, nothing changed. That evening, after dinner, fear returned. Again, only Lai Hung could hear the dragging footsteps on the floor. His wife said, "Oh God, why are you so restless? If you can't sleep, at least let us sleep." Finally, he told them to sleep downstairs. He couldn't take it anymore. With his wife and the servant girl gone, he was alone but slightly less afraid. That afternoon, Lai Hung drifted off briefly, but suddenly felt a cold hand on his shoulder. He awoke with a start and saw a black cat staring at him from just 6 feet away. Terrified, he threw something at it. The cat hissed and bolted upstairs. "That cat isn't a cat anymore," he muttered. His wife lazily replied, "Oh, come on. Now you're being ridiculous. That cat was raised by the teacher since it was a kitten. You know it always sits by the door." She stopped speaking. She knew something wasn't right. The next morning, Saturday, the sun rose gently. His wife said, "All right, I'll go to the market and get a chicken, some sticky rice, and fruit for tomorrow. The girl can go to fetch Mrs. Lawn to help you with some traditional medicine. Come on, try to sleep better." She spoke to him a few times, but got no response. The girl guessed he had probably gone to visit his father's altar. They waited for him to come back to eat, but he never did. Finally, the girl cautiously went to call him. She climbed the stairs, but before she could enter, she screamed and ran back down. Lai Hung had taken a rope and hanged himself in front of his father's altar. She screamed, "Ma'am! Ma'am!" He hanged himself. "Oh God, someone help!" From that day on, the spacious old house was left with only 2 widows, his wife and the servant girl. The old man's ghost never returned, and the black cat disappeared forever, leaving behind only memories beneath the old roof.